twofer.
We do, twofer. It's coming.
It is.
It's coming. Now we're live, Instagram, Facebook, and Facebook.
We got 3 going right
3.
now.
This is good. Well, welcome everybody. It's Monday Night Live.
Yes.
With Kate Semmens, Dean Nixon, TurningLeaf Wellness Center. And last week, oh my gosh, that was such a great interaction. We had so many people interacting with us.
Mm-hmm.
And then we realized that we were not on the TurningLeaf profile page.
We were on Dean's life coaching page.
On my personal page. So we thought, well, okay, tonight we'll do both. So you may be getting notifications, a lot of notifications,
right.
But welcome. You are able to see us, and we're getting as many watchers just tuning right in. So thank you for doing that. Well, Kate, it's been a great weekend. Last weekend we just finished Thursday, Friday, Saturday a level 2 seminar called Discernment, working on that discerning power.
Shout out to my level 2 peeps.
Yes,
we had such an amazing weekend. It's no surprise, I've told you guys this for like months now, that level 2 is my favorite. Don't tell the other levels. They can get jealous a little bit.
a little jealous.
And we just had a wonderful time getting to know ourselves, really growing in our own personal journeys, and everyone that was there really dug in deep and did a lot of amazing work.
It was really, really cool. It was such a great group, and love that ability to work on the discerning piece, being able to really tune into ourselves, being able to remove those pieces that are so reactionary in our lives. We spend so much time reacting, and we're having a hard time creating. And I think that's the beautiful thing about that journey and that process in 3 days, is to be able to get to a point where you're creating on your own rather than getting into that reactive, that I'm uncomfortable, I've got to create this. So it's really, really a cool experience.
Yeah, super cool. And I just wanted to share that it was my second time being a participant in that level 2 process. And so I just, wowzer. So if you have already gone through level 2 before, do not be afraid to do this one again and again, because we're always at a different place in our life to be able to learn and to grow. Something I want to share with you that I learned this weekend about me is whenever I turn a new leaf over in my life and finish a transformation, I need to just chill there for a minute and not head off for the hills.
That's right.
Just sit in it and really listen to that discerning voice inside of me.
It's so true. Sometimes we just, as soon as we uncover that piece, we just want to move on to the next instead of
sprint,
enjoying it.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Good for you. Well, tonight our topic is a fun one. This was a topic that we were in our support group tonight, which is every Monday from 6 to 7:30, thus starting at 8. And as I was talking to the group tonight, they asked what the topic was. I said, you tell us what the topic is tonight. Normally we're coming up with them on our own.
Right. So if you want to say in what we're doing.
Oh, Instagram's back. We lost you for a minute.
If you want to say in the topic that we have, come hang out with us in the family support group.
Yes, it was really cool. So tonight in family support, we were really working on and talking about that struggle that we have a lot of times with allowing our children to progress and our family members to grow. And so the idea came up of really working on creating how to move forward, how to enable people to move forward instead of enabling them in an unhealthy way, which we talked about enabling in the past.
So can we say how to empower people to move forward instead of enabling them?
I like that. Yeah. Thank you for helping me reword that.
You're welcome.
You're good at that.
We're a good team.
So one of the things that we were talking about is how there tends to be this issue growing in our communities and in our world where our young men and our young women are having a struggle moving forward. And I was laughing because about 10 or so years they had that wonderful show called Failure to Launch.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It's even hit the media, that people make fun of it a little bit. So. And
we thought it was this funny little romantic comedy. Needless did we, know, we didn't know it was going to become this cautionary tale.
Right.
And now we're in this situation where it's growing in epidemic proportions, where there's this fear of moving forward, this fear of really allowing ourselves to move forward, and especially in our young men and young women, moving out of the home and getting into life itself. And so we wanted to talk about that. I wanted to talk about that tonight. And what part of the issue was that we're struggling with is why do we have such a hard time allowing our children to move off into the world?
Right. And so I'm curious to know, what are some of the things that you guys maybe talked about in the group about it?
Well, we didn't so much talk about it in the group. Oh, you didn't
get into it.
Right.
They were just like, you and Kate talk about this.
We'll talk about this. But there is one of the issues that we are struggling with, and why it's, I believe, and I'm noticing, and especially as I work with families and parents, and we're dealing with children now that are between the ages of 17 to 30 plus years of age. And what I'm finding is that there is a level of this emotional being taken almost hostage. I know that sounds a little dramatic. I've used it before. I've talked about it before, but there's this level of emotional hostage taking that's occurring where we as parents are afraid to set a limit, set a boundary, say something, do something, because we're afraid. We're so afraid that what we're going to do is set our child off to either harm themselves, or to run away, or to cut us off, or shut us out. And as a consequence of that, we're not saying anything. We're not dealing with anything. We're kind of being held hostage.
And fostering that enabling piece, right?
Right. Then the child themselves is picking up that energy, and the energy is that I'm not being confronted. Well, and weirdly enough, not being confronted creates more anxiety than being confronted.
Oh, I totally agree.
I mean, that's a reality. Is that the more we're not confronted. I always remember about this time. My brother and I, we were down in California visiting family. My parents headed back early. We stayed back with some uncles and aunts, and one of our uncles was driving us home back to Utah, where I grew up. And I remember sitting in the back seat, and we had pulled over at the gas station, and my uncle had bought a bag of candy. My brother and I were sitting in the back seat. Now, back in the day, it was like a paper bag full of candy, loose candy. It wasn't like you had wrapper candy or anything, you know. And I remember as we were driving, my uncle turned back to us. He's like, "Hey, you guys can have, as much candy as you want." Now, in my home, candy was like, we didn't have candy very much. It was like super, super special. My mother was very conscientious about that. But the fact that there was no limit, the fact that there was no boundary, it really created a lot of anxiety in me. Guess how many pieces I had on the way home?
Oh no.
Guess.
4.
4. Yeah. How many of you think?
Well, if you had anxiety, maybe you were too stressed out to eat it.
Yeah.
Or maybe you ate the whole bag. I mean, it's going to go one way or the other.
It could go either way, right? But I remember vividly.
Oh, you had one.
I had one piece. One piece the whole way home. And it was good candy. I was like, wanted more, but because I wasn't being confronted, because the boundary wasn't being put in place, because there wasn't somebody telling me, this is how many, this is your limit. You can have 3 of these. You can have 4 of these. You can have 5 of these. You can have 10 of these. Because there was no boundary there, no confrontation, no healthy boundary setting, I only had one. And then the rest of the time, guess what I thought about? The whole trip.
Having more candy.
Having candy. I'm like, well, what if I have one more? What's going to happen? Well, what if I reach up there, he might say no, but he might not say no. And if I ask him for more, maybe he'll tell, and I'm going through this whole, I don't know how many miles, but I can tell you it took up a lot of the trip.
Absolutely.
And as a consequence of that, I felt that stress around that specific area. Well, it's the same thing with our kids. When they're struggling with boundaries, when they're struggling with what they can feel is happening in our home, they can tell what's happening in our lives. They can tell that there's stress and pressure and contention and conflict, but nobody's talking about it. It creates more anxiety.
Absolutely. I think on both sides too, not just with the kids, but with the parent as well, right? If they're like, oh, geez, I really want my son or daughter to be able to get their own place and get out of my basement. But then you don't talk about it. You don't have the conversation. Then that just creates more and more anxiety as well.
Yes. And it keeps us struggling. So one of the things that is important for us as family members, whether it be a brother that we're helping out, or a child, or a sibling, or a parent, or even parents to some degree, one of the first things we have to do is we have to stop awfulizing things in our minds. We awfulize them. We create this world of, well, if I do this, then this is what's going to happen. And we create these monsters that keep us pinned down. And as those monsters keep us pinned down, we stop confronting things. We stop talking about things. We stop doing things, if that makes sense. So the first step is we've got to stop awfulizing. Right.
Because, I mean, really, we don't know. Right? Like, it could be amazing. So instead of like doomsday prepping about it, right? Like, oh, I'm going to go have a conversation with them and try to get them to move forward in their life. And they're just going to like lose it on me, right? Like, it could be amazing.
It could be. And odds are, and most of the time it really is, because they're waiting. People are waiting for somebody to say something. Even, and that leads us to the other piece is communication. That's the second thing. So the first thing that we've got to do is we've got to stop awfulizing. We've got to stop that craziness in our mind. The second thing that we've got to be able to do is we've got to start communicating. We've got to start talking about what's really going on. And what I find works best is asking questions.
Like what? So what would be some questions that maybe, if we've got a lot of viewers wondering, okay, great, Dean, Kate, specifically help me out.
What would be a question?
Yeah.
Well, one of the questions that you could talk about is surrounding the issue. So if, for example, hypothetically, I'm dealing with my son living and he's now 25, 28 years old.
That's a big gap.
That's a big gap, but I'm
somewhere
seeing
in there.
a lot of it. I'm seeing a lot of it. And that individual's struggling, they're struggling with a lot of pieces. So sitting down with them and talking about, well, tell me how you're feeling about being here. Tell me about how you're feeling about being in the home. Is it comfortable? Are you feeling uncomfortable? Are you struggling with it? And then once you allow them, you open that dialogue, you can talk about, well, how do you feel we should handle this? Because what they don't want to hear, what we don't want to hear, they don't want to hear. Nobody wants to hear you going, well, you need to this.
Right.
Or you should do this. Well, the reason you're struggling is because of that. That's not what we want to do. We want to come back and we want to say, well, how do we solve the problem? So the first thing I do in the communication piece is I ask questions to help identify what the issue is. What is the problem? What do you see as the problem? What do you feel like is keeping you from moving forward? What do you feel like is scaring you from stepping out and doing things to move you forward? Then once they answer that question, it gives us the opportunity to address. And maybe we don't need to address. Maybe we just pose another question, which I always feel like the next question is the best next question to ask is, well, how do we address it? How do you feel? What do you feel like would be best to help move you forward? And where would you like to what help can I give? One of the things that we don't want to ask, we don't want to say, well, what do you want? Where do you want to go? Where do you want to, because if they knew, they would be doing that. But if we just step back and we ask them, well, what do you feel like is the next step for you? What do you feel like will help move you forward? What do you, and really engage them. So the first, again, going back and reviewing, the first thing is we have to stop awfulizing the confrontation or the communication or the interaction. We have to stop awfulizing what will happen if I confront it and they, don't, oh, it's going to be horrible, or they may go hurt themselves, or they may this.
They'll never talk to me again.
Right.
I'll never know my grandchildren.
Yes, I'll never know my grandchildren. And so we get into that piece. And so then the next piece is the communication, but we start by asking the questions so that we help address what is, or identify what is the problem in their mind. Yeah. What do they feel like the problem is? I know what I think it is in my mind, but what do they feel like it is?
So when you say problem, are you talking about just the barriers that are keeping them from moving forward?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, the fears. Is it the fear of failure? Is it the fear of what people might think or say? Is it, what is the issue that they feel like or what do they feel like the issue is?
Maybe they feel like they can't earn enough money to support themselves.
Right.
All those kinds of things.
All those things. And so once we create those 2 steps, we can start moving things forward. Then the next step for us is we just start creating agreements around it. We start, well, okay, so you feel like the first issue is getting a job. Okay, well, what can I do to help you with that? And how long do you feel like you need for that to happen? Okay, can we create an agreement that, you'll do this in a month, and if you're going to do this in a month, then we'll follow up and have communication with it. And that's in a sense really setting a boundary with it or creating agreements around it.
Yeah, and that, I mean, just another shout out for our family group that we do on Monday nights. That's one of my favorite things about the group, is everyone will come in and everybody's working on different agreements that they have with their family members, right? And so it's almost like a little accountability piece in group for all of the people that are coming to group. So you get really good at learning how to set those agreements, because I think it's a skill.
It is.
Like, it's a learned skill. So how much time do we have left? So maybe, Dean, can you help walk our audience here how to make an agreement? You just kind of did a little bit, but like a little bit more, like, well, 1, 2, 3.
The most important thing, again, is we have to identify the problem.
Right.
We have to identify it from both sides of the equation. A lot of times we think, well, I know what the problem is. And sometimes we think, well, you're the problem, right? But that's not the case. The person,
I know the problem, and it's you.
And it's you. and they may be feeling like, well, it's me.
Right.
But the reality is that nobody's ever really the problem. There's just an issue. So it's either a thinking error, and it's kind of goes back to what we were talking about a few webisodes, before, where it's either a riddle that we have to solve.
Right.
It's either an enmeshment that we have to deal with, or it's a obstacle that we have to overcome. And sometimes it's even breaking it down that simple. And if you go back, I don't know, a month ago or so, I think that was when we talked about it. But it's those 3 things that we're really going to be stuck in one of those 3 areas. So first thing we do is we talk, but I have to ask. So if I'm asking you, you may have a different view. You may be like, oh, well, I'm just afraid that people won't, think I'm this and they'll make fun of me or whatever. And I'm thinking, well, I think it's because you have this. But what it does is when I ask you what you feel the problem is, and then I have an opportunity to share, then we come in the middle and we come to the truth.
Right.
Once we have that, then we start to work on the agreements. And the way
I'm so sorry to cut you off. So there almost needs to be an agreement and a definition as to, this is what we're working on.
Right. This is the issue. This is the problem.
Cool.
Then the next piece that we're going to work on is creating an agreement around it. So how do we create an agreement around that? So the first thing about boundaries or agreements is that we have an agreement, and then we have an agreement within that agreement. So we have the agreement of, okay, I'm going to be looking for a job within a month. Okay, so that's the agreement. The agreement within the agreement is, well, what happens if you don't look for a job? How do you want me to respond? How do you want me to interact with you? Here's how I want to interact. How would you like me to interact?
Right.
And then it's just simply executing that
following
agreement.
through. So that agreement within the agreement is the boundary. Right. And so then you just have to hold your boundary and follow through. Yeah, I love it so much. I'm still learning how to get good at it. And I love that the agreement, that I feel like we have 3 different stages of agreement, right? So what's the definition? What's the
identify the problem from both sides of the equation.
Right. And then you create the agreement about how to resolve that problem. Right. And then you just add in your boundary of, okay, well, if it's not completed by this time that we've agreed upon, then
how do you want me to respond?
Exactly.
Or what is our next step? Or where do we go from there? And that's usually where we fall down in moving people forward, including ourselves, is if I don't create a follow-up, then I've already made it hard for myself to move forward. So if I'm doing it with myself, for example, and I'm saying, okay, I want to get out of my parents' basement, or I want to get out of my parents' living room, then we go back to that idea of, all right, well, what's my problem, identify my problem. The next thing I'm going to do is create the agreement. Okay, I'm going to give myself this period of time. And then what happens if I don't? How do I want to respond, or what do I want to do to follow through? So I can even do that with myself if I'm the individual watching this and I'm saying, okay, I'm trying to move myself through this issue. And this doesn't just pertain to moving out of your folks' place.
Absolutely.
It can be moving on in a career. It can be moving forward in a career. It could be taking those healthy risks that we need to take, or any of those types of things. This system works for that as well.
Yes, moving through a next stage in a relationship, or breaking down codependency.
Right.
Yeah, that's super applicable in everything.
Well, we're already at our 20, so it has gone so fast. So thank you everybody for tuning in. Again, please like and share our feed. We are on YouTube. You can always go to the YouTube channel, Turning Leaf Wellness Center.
I'm working on it.
Kate's trying to get them all loaded. We've got a lot yet to do, but it gives you an opportunity to go back. And I've had a lot of people that are listening to them. I've got a buddy of mine that just listens to them. He doesn't even watch them. So
nice. Treats it like a podcast.
Yeah, treats it like a podcast.
That's cool.
Please feel free to do that, like and share. Thank you for tuning in.
If you're wondering, we like you guys, and we would share you.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So until next Monday night, thank you for tuning in. Dean Nixon, Kate Semmens, Turning Leaf Wellness Center. Have a great week.
Bye-bye.
Good night.